Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. The Guest in Room 237. I was standing in that bathroom at 3 a.m., water dripping from my hair onto the cracked tile floor when I heard her voice for the first time. Not through the wall, but right behind me, whispering my name like she'd been waiting for me to finally listen. But when I spun around, there was nothing there except wet footprints that definitely weren't mine, leading from where I stood all the way to my bed. Let me back up and tell you how this all started, because I need someone to understand that I'm not crazy, even though what happened makes no sense at all. I was in Cleveland for a 3-day pharmaceutical conference, the kind of mind-numbing work obligation that pays well but slowly kills your soul. My company booked me at the Continental Inn, one of those budget places with thin walls and thinner carpets, the kind where you don't ask too many questions as long as the sheets look clean. I'd stayed in worse places. The room was on the second floor, room 236. Standard layout. Queen bed, small bathroom, desk by the window overlooking the parking lot. Nothing remarkable except for this faint smell I couldn't quite place. It wasn't cigarettes, though there was definitely that lingering tobacco undertone that no amount of industrial air freshener can cover. This was something else, something sweet and stale, like flowers that had been sitting in water too long. I dropped my luggage and immediately opened the window, hoping to air things out. The smell lessened but never completely went away, like it was coming from inside the walls themselves. I chalked it up to old building syndrome and figured I'd get used to it. That first night I was exhausted from travel and the opening conference sessions. I fell asleep around 11, sinking into that deep, dreamless sleep you only get when your body finally stops moving after a long day. But sometime around 2 in the morning, something woke me up. Crying. Soft, muffled crying coming from the room next door. I lay there listening, and it was the most heartbroken sound I'd ever heard. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and inconsolable, like someone had lost everything that mattered. It would build to these quiet sobs, then fade to almost nothing, then build again. My heart actually ached listening to it. I've always been empathetic, maybe too much so. I wondered if I should do something, maybe call the front desk to do a welfare check. But it was late and hotel walls are thin. Maybe someone was just having a bad night, watching a sad movie, dealing with personal stuff. We've all been there. The crying continued for maybe 20 minutes, then stopped completely. I eventually fell back asleep. The second night, it happened again. Same time, around 2 a.m., same desperate, heart-wrenching sound. This time I got up and pressed my ear to the wall we shared. The crying was definitely coming from room 237, and it sounded like a woman, probably young. But here's the weird thing. Every time I put my ear to the wall, the crying would stop immediately. Complete silence. I'd wait a few minutes, go back to bed, and within moments it would start up again. I tried this 3 or 4 times, and the pattern never changed. The moment I actively listened, it stopped. The moment I stopped listening, it resumed. Like whoever it was could somehow sense when I was paying attention. On the third morning, I decided to ask about it. The guy at the front desk looked like he'd been working hotels for decades. Tired eyes, permanent customer service smile that didn't quite reach the corners. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm in room 236 and I've been hearing someone crying next door at night. Room 237. Is everything okay with your guest over there?" His expression changed subtly. The smile faltered for just a second. "Room 237, he repeated, clicking through something on his computer. "Sir, room 237 has been vacant for 3 weeks. We're doing some maintenance work in there. Plumbing issues. No one's been staying in that room." I felt this weird chill run down my spine. Are you sure? Because I've definitely been hearing someone crying. A woman. He turned the computer monitor toward me. There it was. Room 237 marked as out of order with a bright red X. Checkout date showing 3 weeks prior, no new reservations. Maybe it's the room on the other side, he suggested. Sound can carry in these older buildings. But I knew what I'd heard, and I knew which wall it was coming from. That night I was determined to figure this out. I set up my phone to record audio while I slept, positioned right next to the shared wall. I also made a point to stay awake until at least 2:30 a.m., just to see what would happen. Sure enough, right around 2 a.m. it started. The crying. But this time I forced myself to just listen without moving, without pressing my ear to the wall. And what I heard made my blood run cold. It wasn't just crying. Mixed in with the sobs, I could hear words. Whispered words in a voice so broken and desperate it made me want to cry myself. Please, she kept saying. Please, I didn't mean to. Please let me go home. I just want to go home. And then, just as I was working up the courage to bang on the wall and ask if she needed help, the voice changed. It got closer, like she was pressed right against the wall, speaking directly to me. Can you hear me? She whispered. In 236, can you hear me? I froze. She knew my room number. She knew I was listening. I've been trying to get someone to hear me for so long, the voice continued, and now it sounded like it was coming from inside my room, not through the wall. No one ever hears me anymore. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk, hands shaking. This is room 236, I said when someone answered. I need you to check on room 237 right now. There's definitely someone in there and I think they might be in trouble. Sir, I already told you yesterday, I don't care what your computer says, I interrupted. Someone is in that room and they're asking for help. There was a long pause. Sir, I'll send someone up to check, but I'm telling you, that room is empty. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. It was a security guard and the night manager. They had a key to room 237. We're going to check the room next door, the manager said. You're welcome to observe from the hallway, but I want you to see for yourself that it's empty. I followed them out and watched as they unlocked room 237. The door swung open to reveal a room identical to mine, except everything was covered in plastic sheeting. Tools and paint cans were scattered around. It smelled like turpentine and drywall compound. See, the manager said, renovation. No one's been staying here. But as we stood there, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were wet footprints on the plastic-covered floor, small, bare feet, and they led from the bathroom to the bed just like in my room every morning. What about those footprints? I asked, pointing. The security guard looked where I was pointing, then looked at me with concern. Sir, I don't see any footprints. I looked again. They were clear as day to me, wet impressions of feet getting fainter as they dried, but definitely there. You don't see them? Right there, leading from the bathroom? They exchanged glances. Sir, maybe you should get some rest. The conference stress can really get to people. After they left, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the chair by my window staring at the wall that separated my room from 237. And around 4 a.m. I heard her again. But this time she wasn't crying. She was laughing. Soft, sad laughter that somehow sounded grateful. Thank you, she whispered, and her voice was definitely coming from inside my room now. Thank you for hearing me. No one has heard me in so long. I packed my bags and checked out that morning 2 days early. I told my boss I had food poisoning, but as I was loading my car, I looked up at the second floor and saw something that still haunts me. There was someone standing in the window of room 237. A young woman in a white dress, her hair wet and stringy, pressed against the glass. She raised one hand and waved at me, and I could see her mouth moving, saying "thank you" over and over. I blinked and she was gone. The conference coordinator later told me that 3 other attendees had requested room changes from the 2nd floor due to disturbances. All of them had been staying in rooms adjacent to 237. I still don't know who she was or what happened to her in that room, but I know she'd been trying to reach someone, anyone, for weeks. And for 3 nights, I was the only person who could hear her. To this day, I can't stay in hotels without requesting a room on the top floor as far from any maintenance rooms as possible. Because I learned something that week that I wish I could forget. Some guests never really check out, and they're desperately lonely for someone to acknowledge they're still there. Story 2. The mirror never lies. I was staring at myself in that hotel bathroom mirror, watching my reflection mouth the words, "help me," while I stood there in complete silence, when I finally understood that the person in the glass wasn't me anymore. It was someone who had been trapped in there far longer than I'd been alive. Someone who had been waiting decades for the right person to look close enough to see the truth. This happened 6 months ago at the Grandview Hotel in Portland, one of those supposedly historic places that trades on its vintage charm but can't quite hide the fact that something went very wrong in its past. I was there for my sister's wedding. She'd booked the whole family into this place because she loved the old world elegance, which is what people say when they mean creepy but photogenic. My room was on the 4th floor, corner suite, supposedly one of the nicer ones. Victorian wallpaper, antique furniture, a bathroom with this enormous mirror that dominated the entire wall above the sink. The mirror was easily 6 feet wide and 4 feet tall, framed in ornate silver that had tarnished with age. Beautiful, in an intimidating way. The first thing I noticed was the delay. I'd walk into the bathroom and my reflection would appear just a split second after I entered the frame. Like watching a video call with bad lag. I'd raise my hand to brush my teeth and my reflection would raise its hand a beat later. I'd turn my head and the mirror version would follow, always just slightly behind. At first I thought it was exhaustion, wedding preparation stress, too much coffee, not enough sleep. Your brain plays tricks when you're tired. I even tested it a few times, making sudden movements and trying to catch the delay. But it was subtle enough that I started doubting myself. Maybe I was imagining it. By the 2nd day, I'd gotten used to it. Weird, but harmless. I had bigger things to worry about. My maid of honor speech. My +1 who'd canceled last minute. My mother's passive-aggressive comments about my dating life. A slightly laggy mirror was the least of my problems. The 3rd night, everything changed. I was getting ready for bed, washing my face before the rehearsal dinner the next day. The bathroom lights were bright, unforgiving fluorescence that made everything look harsh and clinical. I was focused on scrubbing off my makeup when I saw something in my peripheral vision that made me freeze. In the mirror, there was someone standing behind me. I spun around immediately, heart hammering, but the bathroom was empty. Just me, the towels, the cramped shower stall. Nothing. I looked back at the mirror, and there I was, alone, looking exactly as panicked as I felt. No one behind me, just my own reflection, perfectly normal now, moving in real time with no delay at all. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe shadows from the hallway cast at a weird angle. Old hotels have strange acoustics, strange lighting. It happens, but I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been standing directly behind me in the reflection, close enough to touch me, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress or nightgown. I'd only glimpsed them for a second, but the image was burned into my mind. Pale face, dark hair, eyes that seemed to be staring directly into mine through the glass. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face in the mirror. I kept getting up to check the bathroom, flicking on the light and looking carefully at the reflection. But everything appeared normal. Just me, alone, looking increasingly haggard as the night wore on. The fourth day was the wedding. I was busy enough with preparations that I managed to push the mirror incident to the back of my mind. But that evening, after the ceremony and reception, when I finally dragged myself back to my room exhausted and slightly drunk on champagne, the bathroom light was already on. I definitely hadn't left it on. I'm obsessive about turning off lights, a habit drilled into me by environmentally conscious parents. But there it was, fluorescent bulb humming, casting everything in that harsh clinical glow. I approached the mirror cautiously and immediately saw that the delay was back, worse than ever. This time it wasn't just a split-second lag. My reflection was a full 3 or 4 seconds behind my movements. I'd raise my hand, and mirror me would continue staring straight ahead for several seconds before slowly, mechanically, raising its hand to match. It was like watching someone learning to copy my movements, someone who had to think about each gesture before mimicking it. I started experimenting, making random movements, touching my nose, running my fingers through my hair, turning to the left and right. Each time my reflection would pause as if processing what it had seen, then carefully duplicate the action. But the facial expression never changed. While I was obviously freaked out, growing more panicked by the minute, my reflection maintained this eerily calm, blank stare. Then I noticed something else. In the background of the mirror behind my reflection, the bathroom looked different, older. The wallpaper was different, darker, more ornate. There was furniture that wasn't in my actual bathroom. A chair, a small table, what looked like old-fashioned medicine bottles lined up along the sink. And there were other people. At first, I thought they were just shadows, tricks of the antique, lighting. But as I stared longer, they became clearer. Men and women in clothing from different eras. 1920s drop-waist dresses, 1950s suits, 1980s power shoulders. They were all standing around the edges of the mirror bathroom, perfectly still, watching my reflection with intense, hungry eyes. They looked like they'd been waiting for something for a very long time. I stumbled backward, away from the mirror, and when I looked at the actual bathroom around me, it was exactly as it should be. Modern fixtures, contemporary wallpaper, just me alone in a normal hotel room. But when I looked back at the mirror, that other bathroom was still there, filled with those waiting figures, and my reflection was still staring back with that blank, calm expression that wasn't mine at all. That's when I realized my reflection wasn't delayed. It was someone else entirely. Someone wearing my face, standing in my position, but with their own consciousness, their own agenda. And all those other people in the mirror bathroom weren't reflections either. They were previous guests, previous victims. People who had looked into this mirror and somehow gotten trapped on the other side. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on the mirror, and watched as my reflection, or whoever was wearing my appearance, slowly smiled. It was a cold, knowing smile that I'd never made in my life. Then it raised one hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside, fingers splayed wide. The other figures in the mirror began moving toward the front, crowding around my fake reflection, all of them pressing their hands against the glass, all of them staring directly at me with desperate, pleading eyes. Their mouths were moving, all saying the same thing over and over, but I couldn't hear them through the glass. I fumbled for the light switch and plunged the bathroom into darkness. In the blackness, I heard a sound that still gives me nightmares. Dozens of hands slapping against glass, fingers scratching and clawing, trying to break through from the other side. I didn't turn the light back on. I grabbed my suitcase, threw my belongings inside, and got dressed in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to navigate around the room. I was checking out within an hour, making up some excuse about a family emergency. But as I was leaving, I made the mistake of glancing back at the bathroom one more time. Even in the darkness, the mirror was glowing with its own faint light, and I could see all those trapped figures still pressed against the glass. And in the center, wearing my face, the thing that had been pretending to be my reflection raised its hand one more time. Not in a wave goodbye, but in a gesture I recognized. It was beckoning me to come back. I drove home that night instead of staying for the post-wedding brunch, making up excuses about work deadlines. My sister was hurt, but I couldn't explain the real reason without sounding insane. How do you tell someone that you nearly got trapped in a mirror by the ghosts of previous hotel guests? 3 weeks later, my sister called me. She'd gotten a note from the Grandview Hotel. Apparently, they were renovating the 4th floor due to structural issues, and wanted to apologize for any inconvenience during her wedding weekend. They mentioned that several guests had requested room changes due to electrical problems with the bathroom lighting. I looked up the hotel's history online and found something that made my blood run cold. The Grandview had been built in 1893 as a private mansion before being converted to a hotel in the 1920s. But in 1934, there had been a fire on the 4th floor that killed 11 guests. The fire had started in the bathrooms, something about faulty electrical wiring behind the mirrors. The official report mentioned that several bodies were found pressed against the bathroom mirrors as if they'd been trying to break through the glass to escape the flames. I still can't look in mirrors the same way. Every reflection seems slightly delayed now. Slightly off, like there might be someone else behind the glass studying my movements, learning to be me. I've started avoiding hotel bathrooms entirely, using compact mirrors for makeup, brushing my teeth in the kitchen sink when I travel. Because I know now that mirrors don't just show you your reflection. Sometimes they show you the people who got trapped looking for a way out, and they're always looking for someone to take their place on the other side of the glass. Story 3. Do Not Disturb. I woke up to find someone sitting at the foot of my bed, perfectly motionless in the darkness, and when I screamed and lunged for the light switch, they vanished. But the bedspread where they'd been sitting was ice cold, and there were wet handprints pressed into the fabric like someone had been gripping the mattress for hours. I need to tell you about the Palace Inn in Tucson because what happened there has fundamentally changed how I think about privacy, about locked doors, about the simple act of hanging a Do Not Disturb sign and expecting it to mean something. I was there for 4 nights, a work trip that got extended due to client meetings running long. Nothing fancy. I just needed a clean room and reliable Wi-Fi. The Palace Inn wasn't actually palatial, just one of those mid-tier chain hotels that tries to sound more upscale than it is. My room was on the 3rd floor. Standard business traveler setup. Queen bed, desk, small bathroom, television mounted on the wall. I'm particular about my privacy when I travel. I don't like housekeeping coming in while I'm there. Don't want strangers handling my belongings or seeing my personal items scattered around. So every night before I went to sleep, I hung the Do Not Disturb sign on my door handle and engaged every lock the room had. The main deadbolt, the security chain, even the little flip lock that probably wouldn't stop anyone determined, but made me feel more secure. The first morning, I woke up around 7 to discover that my room had been cleaned. Not just straightened up, completely serviced. Fresh towels folded and stacked in the bathroom. Bed made with hospital corners, carpet vacuumed, trash emptied, everything dusted and arranged. Even my toiletries had been organized on the bathroom counter in a neat little row. I was furious. I called the front desk immediately. "This is room 314, I said. I had a Do Not Disturb sign on my door and someone entered my room while I was sleeping and cleaned it. This is completely unacceptable." The desk clerk sounded genuinely confused. Sir, I'm looking at our housekeeping logs and there's no record of your room being serviced yesterday or this morning. In fact, it shows that housekeeping was specifically instructed to skip your room due to the DND sign. Then explain how my room got cleaned, I said. Someone was definitely in here. Let me transfer you to our head of housekeeping. 5 minutes later, I was talking to Maria, a woman who'd apparently been managing housekeeping at the Palace Inn for over a decade. She was adamant that none of her staff had entered my room. Mr. Peterson, I personally ensure that DND signs are respected, she said. It's one of our most important policies. Are you certain the room was cleaned? I looked around again. Fresh towels, made bed, vacuumed carpet, organized belongings. I'm completely certain. That's very strange, she admitted. I'll look into it and make sure it doesn't happen again. But it did happen again. The next morning, same thing. Room perfectly cleaned, every surface spotless, my belongings carefully arranged. This time I noticed details I'd missed before. The water glasses had been washed and positioned exactly 2 inches from the edge of the nightstand. The television remote placed at a precise right angle to the edge of the desk. My shoes lined up by the door with military precision. It wasn't just cleaned, it was organized with an obsessive attention to detail that felt almost ritualistic. I called the front desk again, and this time they sent the assistant manager up to my room. A thin, nervous man in his 50s who kept adjusting his glasses and apologizing. Mr. Peterson, I want to assure you that we take privacy very seriously, he said, looking around my room. But our keycard logs show no entries to your room between 11 p.m. last night and 7 a.m. this morning. The only keycard access was yours. Then how do you explain this? I gestured around the immaculate room. He had no answer. But he offered to post a security guard outside my room that night, just to make sure no unauthorized personnel entered. I agreed, thinking that would solve the problem. I went to bed that night feeling secure, knowing someone was watching my door. I engaged all the locks, hung the DND sign, and even placed a chair against the door as an extra precaution. The next morning, the room was cleaned again. Perfectly, obsessively cleaned. And when I opened my door to check with the security guard, there was no one in the hallway. I found him downstairs in the lobby, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. Sir, I watched your door all night, he insisted. From 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., no one entered that hallway except you when you came back from dinner. I would have seen anyone approaching your room. That's when I decided to set up my own surveillance. I had my laptop with me and I positioned it to record the door while I slept. I also set up my phone to record the room itself just to see if I could catch whoever was coming in. The next morning, I reviewed the footage with growing confusion and terror. The recording showed my door at 11:47 p.m. when I went to bed. For the next several hours, nothing. Just an empty hotel hallway, occasionally broken by the sound of elevators or distant voices. But then, at exactly 3 a.m., something impossible happened. My door opened. Not unlocked, not forced. It simply swung open smoothly and silently despite all the locks I'd engaged. The DND sign swayed slightly in the movement but remained hanging on the handle. The door stayed open for exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds, then closed just as smoothly as it had opened. But here's the thing that still makes me break out in cold sweats. In those 7.5 minutes, no one came through the doorway. The door was open, I could see into the dark hallway beyond, but no person, no housekeeping cart, no equipment entered my room. Just an open door leading to empty space. The recording from inside my room was even more disturbing. It showed me sleeping peacefully while the room around me transformed. I couldn't see who or what was doing the work. The camera just captured the results happening in real time. Towels folding themselves in the bathroom, the bed making itself around my sleeping form, my belongings sliding across surfaces to arrange themselves in perfect order. At one point, something passed directly between me and the camera, briefly blocking the view, but when it moved away, there was nothing visible there. Just a shadow that cast no shadow. I packed my bags immediately and tried to check out a day early, but the front desk clerk, a different person from the ones I'd spoken to before, looked at me with genuine concern. "Sir, you're not currently checked in here," she said, staring at her computer screen. "According to our system, you checked out yesterday morning." "That's impossible. I've been here for 3 nights. Look, here's my key card." She took the key card and ran it through her scanner. "This card has been deactivated. It shows your checkout time as 11:47 a.m. yesterday." I was standing there with my luggage in the lobby of a hotel, insisting I wasn't a guest, with a key card that shouldn't work but had gotten me into my room just minutes earlier. The clerk was looking at me like I might be having some kind of breakdown. "Let me call my manager," she said diplomatically. That's when I realized what was happening. I looked at my phone to check the time and felt my world tilt sideways. According to my phone, it was yesterday, the day I was supposed to check out, but I had clear, vivid memories of 2 additional nights in that room, 2 more mornings of finding my space obsessively cleaned by invisible hands. I left the hotel in a daze, unsure of what day it actually was, unsure of how much time I'd really spent in that room. When I got home and checked my work calendar, I discovered I'd missed 2 days of meetings. My colleagues said I'd never returned their calls, never responded to emails. As far as everyone else was concerned, I'd vanished for 48 hours. But I remember those extra nights. I remember lying in that bed, listening to the sounds of invisible housekeeping, feeling the mattress shift slightly as someone moved around the room in the darkness. I remember waking up repeatedly to the sensation that someone was standing very close to my bed watching me sleep, but never being able to see them. And I remember that final night when I woke up around 3 a.m. to find someone sitting at the foot of my bed. They were completely still, just a dark silhouette against the window, but I could feel their attention focused on me with laser intensity. When I screamed and reached for the light switch, they didn't move or react. They simply ceased to exist, like a shadow that disappears when you turn on a lamp. But the cold spot on the bedspread remained, and those wet handprints were evidence that someone had been gripping the mattress, holding on tightly for much longer than I'd been aware of their presence. I still don't know what happened to those missing days, or who was cleaning my room with such obsessive precision. But I learned something that week that I'll never forget. Some hotels have guests who never check out, and they take great pride in maintaining their space, even if it means bending time itself to ensure their work gets done. Now, when I travel, I never hang the "Do Not Disturb" sign. I'd rather deal with intrusive housekeeping than risk attracting the attention of whatever was in that room, whatever wanted so desperately to take care of me that it was willing to steal time itself to do the job properly. Story 4. The previous guest's luggage. I was kneeling on that hotel room floor, staring at my own handwriting in a journal that belonged to someone who died decades before I was born. Reading my own words, describing the same terror I was feeling in that exact moment, when I realized the suitcase hadn't been left behind by accident. It had been left there for me specifically, and I was about to become the next entry in that impossible journal. This happened last fall at the Riverside Motor Inn, one of those places that hasn't been updated since the 1970s but somehow manages to stay in business by being cheap and reasonably clean. I was driving cross-country, taking the slow route to clear my head after a brutal divorce, and I'd pulled off the highway around midnight when exhaustion finally won over my desire to keep moving. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Orange carpet that had seen better decades, wood paneling, a bed with a floral comforter that smelled faintly of industrial detergent. I dropped my duffel bag on the chair and was heading to the bathroom when I noticed something under the bed. A suitcase. Old leather, the kind with brass corners and vintage travel stickers from places like Grand Hotel Vienna and the Ambassador Chicago. It looked like it belonged in a museum, or at least an antique shop. Definitely not something a modern traveler would be using. I called the front desk. The night clerk sounded half asleep and irritated to be bothered. "Yeah, there's a suitcase under the bed in room 12, I said. "Looks like the previous guest left it behind." "A suitcase?" He sounded confused. "What kind of suitcase?" I described it, and there was a long pause. "Sir, room 12 hasn't been occupied in over a week. If there's a suitcase there, it's been there for a while. I'll send someone up in the morning to collect it." But morning was 8 hours away, and I was curious. The suitcase was beautiful in an old-world way, the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. The leather was worn but well-maintained, and those travel stickers told the story of someone who'd seen the world back when travel was an elegant affair rather than the cattle car experience it is today. I figured one look couldn't hurt. If there was identification inside, I could at least let the front desk know who to contact. The suitcase wasn't locked. The brass latches opened with a satisfying click, and the smell that wafted out was intoxicating. Leather and lavender and something like old books. Inside, everything was perfectly organized with the kind of meticulous care that spoke to a different era of travel. There were clothes, but not modern ones. A man's suit that looked like it was from the 1940s, complete with suspenders and a pocket watch. Shirts with detachable collars. Shoes that had been polished to a mirror shine. A woman's dress that looked like something Katharine Hepburn might have worn, along with silk stockings still in their original packaging. But it was the photographs that really caught my attention. They were black and white, professional quality, showing a couple in various locations around the world. The man was tall and distinguished, with that classic movie star look of the 1940s, slicked back hair, strong jawline, confident smile. The woman was elegant and sophisticated, with dark hair styled in victory rolls and eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the old photographs. They looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in the way that people in love often do when they're young and the whole world seems open to them. There were pictures of them in front of famous landmarks. The Eiffel Tower, Big Ben, the Colosseum, always smiling, always holding each other like they never wanted to let go. At the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in tissue paper, I found a leather-bound journal. That's where everything went wrong. The journal was filled with handwriting that looked exactly like mine. Not similar, identical. The same loops and slants, the same way I dot my I's and cross my T's, even the same slight rightward lean that comes from being left-handed and trying not to smudge the ink. But the dates in the journal went back to 1947. The entries started normal enough. Travel observations, descriptions of hotels and restaurants, the kind of thing you'd expect from someone documenting a honeymoon or extended vacation. The handwriting was excited, optimistic, full of plans for the future. But as I read further, the tone changed. The entries became increasingly worried, then frightened, then desperate. "The room feels wrong," one entry read. "Sarah says I'm being paranoid, but I know someone has been in here while we were out. Things are moved, rearranged. The suitcase was open when we came back from dinner, even though I distinctly remember latching it. Found footprints on the carpet that aren't ours. Sarah thinks it's housekeeping, but these prints are bare feet, and they lead from the bathroom to our bed. Why would housekeeping staff be barefoot in our room? Sarah is gone. I woke up this morning and she wasn't in bed. Her clothes are still here, her purse, everything. But she's nowhere in the hotel. The staff says they never saw her leave. They're looking, but I know something terrible has happened. This place is wrong. The room is wrong. I should never have brought her here." The entries became more frantic, more disjointed. Whoever was writing seemed to be losing their grip on reality, describing sounds in the walls, shadows that moved independently. the sensation of being watched constantly. And then, near the end of the journal, I found an entry that made my blood freeze. A new guest checked in today. Room 12. I can see them through the window, and they look exactly like I did when Sarah and I first arrived here. Young, optimistic, completely unaware of what this place really is. I want to warn them, but I know they won't listen. No one ever listens until it's too late. I'm going to leave the suitcase for them to find. Maybe if they read this, they'll understand what's happening before it's too late for them too. The entry was dated that day, not 1947, today's date, but it was written in my handwriting in a journal that was clearly decades old. I flipped to the last page and found one final entry written in fresh ink. His name is David Peterson. He's 34, recently divorced, driving cross-country to clear his head. He checked into room 12 at 11:43 p.m. on October 15th. He found the suitcase at 12:27 a.m. By the time he reads this, it will be too late for him to leave. The room doesn't let people go once they've seen what's in the suitcase. David will understand soon enough, and when the next guest arrives, David will be the one leaving the suitcase for them to find. That was my name, my age, my situation, the exact time I'd found the suitcase. I dropped the journal and backed away from the bed, but when I looked around the room, something had changed. The orange carpet was different, darker, more luxurious. The wood paneling had been replaced by elegant wallpaper. The cheap motel furniture was gone, replaced by antique pieces that matched the era of the clothes in the suitcase. And standing by the window just at the edge of my vision was a man in a 1940s suit. He turned toward me slowly, and I saw that his face was mine, but older, worn down by decades of desperation and fear. "You found it," he said, and his voice was my voice, but hollow and tired. "I'm sorry. I tried to warn you in the journal, but the room won't let me be direct about it. It has to be discovered naturally, or it doesn't work." "What doesn't work?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "The cycle," he said sadly. "Someone has to stay. Someone has to maintain the room, keep the suitcase ready for the next guest. I've been here since 1947, waiting for someone to take my place so I can finally rest." I ran for the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. The deadbolt was engaged, but I hadn't locked it. The chain was attached, but I hadn't put it on. Every security device in the room was activated, sealing me inside. "It won't open until you accept," the man who was me said. "Until you understand that this is your responsibility now. The room needs a caretaker, and you're the one who found the suitcase." I spent the rest of that night trying everything, calling the front desk. The phone was dead. Trying to break the window, it wouldn't even crack. Pounding on the walls, they absorbed the sound completely. Nothing worked. The room had become a perfect prison, and I was trapped inside with my own future self and the growing realization that I was never leaving. But as dawn approached, something changed. The man by the window began to fade, becoming translucent, then disappearing entirely. The room gradually returned to its original cheap motel appearance. The door handle turned easily when I tried it. I was free to go. I packed my bag in record time and got out of there, driving straight through until I was 3 states away. But I made the mistake of looking back as I loaded my car, and I saw someone standing in the window of room 12. It was me. Older, sadder, wearing that same 1940s suit I'd found in the suitcase. And I was holding up the leather journal, pointing to it, mouthing the words, "Next time." I never found out what happened to Sarah, the woman in the photographs. But I have a terrible suspicion that she became something else in that room, something that helps trap the next guest who finds the suitcase. Because I've started having dreams about her. And in those dreams, she's standing beside my bed at night, whispering that she's been waiting so long for me to come back and finish what we started. I don't stay in motels anymore. I don't travel alone. And I definitely don't investigate luggage that previous guests have left behind, because I learned that some things aren't forgotten by accident. They're left as bait for the next person who's supposed to take your place in a story that never really ends. Story 5. They never changed the sheets. I was lying in that narrow motel bed, drenched in someone else's cold sweat and fear, when I finally peeled back the mattress pad and saw the words written in what looked like dried blood. "He's still here." And that's when I understood that whoever had tried to warn future guests was probably still in this room somewhere. And I was about to find out exactly where they'd been hiding all this time. Let me tell you about the Sunset Motel in Bakersfield, because I need someone to understand why I can't sleep in hotel beds anymore. Why I bring my own sheets everywhere I travel, and why the smell of industrial laundry detergent makes me break out in panic sweats. I was broke. Completely, desperately broke in the way that makes you question every life choice that led to sleeping in your car in a Walmart parking lot. I'd been driving for 3 days, living off gas station coffee and whatever was on sale in the clearance section, looking for work in a job market that seemed determined to reject me. The Sunset Motel was the kind of place you end up when you have $37 to your name and nowhere else to go. The neon sign had half its letters burned out, so it just read "Sue et Moel" in flickering pink and blue. The parking lot was cracked asphalt and weeds, and the whole place had that desperate end-of-the-line feeling that matched my mood perfectly. The desk clerk was a skeletal man in his 70s who looked like he'd been running this place since the Carter administration. He took my cash without making eye contact and handed me an actual metal key. Not a key card, but an old-fashioned key attached to a plastic diamond that said Room 7 in faded letters. "Checkouts at 11, he mumbled. "No smoking, no pets, no visitors after 10 p.m. The room was exactly what I'd expected for $29 a night. Paneling from the 1970s, carpet that might have been orange once upon a time, a window air conditioning unit that wheezed like an asthmatic. But it had a bed and a roof, which made it a palace compared to my Honda Civic. The bed was a double covered in a comforter that had probably been trendy during the Reagan years. The sheets looked clean enough, white with that slightly grayish tinge that comes from years of industrial washing, but no obvious stains or damage. I was too tired to be picky. I fell asleep almost immediately, the kind of exhausted unconsciousness that comes from physical and emotional depletion. But I woke up around 3 a.m. feeling wrong in a way I couldn't immediately identify. I was soaked in sweat. Not my sweat. It was cold, clammy, and had a smell to it that wasn't mine. Something medicinal and sour, like someone had been sick for a long time. And it wasn't just damp. It was like someone had dumped a bucket of cold, fear-tinged perspiration all over the bed while I slept. I got up and turned on the light, examining the sheets. They looked the same as when I'd gone to sleep, but they were saturated with this cold, foreign sweat that made my skin crawl. It was like lying in someone else's nightmare. I stripped the bed completely, wrapped myself in the scratchy motel towels, and tried to sleep in the chair. But even across the room, I could smell that sick, frightened scent coming from the bedding I'd piled in the corner. The next morning, I complained to the desk clerk. "The sheets in room 7 are contaminated with something," I told him. "They're soaked with sweat that isn't mine, and it smells like someone was seriously ill." He looked at me with the tired expression of someone who'd heard every complaint possible in 40 years of running a bottom-tier motel. "Housekeeping changes all the sheets between guests," he said flatly. "If you don't like the accommodations, there's a Marriott 15 miles up the highway." He knew I couldn't afford the Marriott, but he did give me a fresh set of sheets from the housekeeping cart, and I spent an hour stripping and remaking the bed myself. checking every inch of the mattress for stains or signs of previous occupancy. The second night was worse. I woke up not just damp with that cold alien sweat, but also shivering with a fear that didn't belong to me. It was like someone else's terror had soaked into the mattress and was now seeping into my skin, carrying with it fragments of memories that weren't mine. Flashes of images that felt like someone else's nightmares. Hands reaching under the door, shadows moving across the ceiling. The sensation of being watched through the window. Voices whispering just outside the range of hearing. But most disturbing was the overwhelming sense of helplessness. The feeling of being trapped somewhere with no way out and no one coming to help. I started having dreams that weren't dreams. Memories of arguments, of someone pleading and crying, of heavy footsteps in the hallway outside, of something being dragged across carpet in the next room. And through it all, this pervasive sense of dread, like someone knew they were in terrible danger but couldn't escape. By the third morning, I was a wreck. I hadn't really slept, just dozed fitfully between episodes of waking up soaked in that cold fear sweat. I demanded different sheets again, and this time I also asked for a different room. Room 7's the only vacancy, the clerk said. You don't like it, you can leave. But I couldn't leave. I had nowhere else to go and no money for anywhere better. I was trapped in that room as surely as whoever had left their terror soaked into those sheets. That third night, I decided to investigate. I couldn't keep waking up drenched in someone else's nightmare sweat without understanding what had happened in that room. I pulled the sheets completely off the bed and examined every inch of the mattress with my phone's flashlight. That's when I found the stains. They weren't visible in the dim overhead light, but the phone's LED revealed dark blotches all over the mattress. Some small, like drops, others large and irregular, like someone had bled or sweated extensively in specific spots. The stains had a pattern to them, concentrated near the head of the bed and along one side, like someone had been lying there for a long time, while something terrible happened to them. I lifted the mattress pad, and that's where I found the message. Written in what looked like dried blood in shaky handwriting that suggested someone was either injured or terrified beyond reason, were the words, "He's still here." Below that, in the same desperate scrawl, "Look under the bed." My hands were shaking as I got down on my knees and used my phone's light to peer under the bed frame. At first, I saw nothing but dust and a few pieces of trash that housekeeping had missed. But as I angled the light differently, I realized there was something else. Scratches. Deep gouges in the wooden floor forming letters. Someone had carved words into the floorboards with their fingernails, or maybe a key working from underneath the bed where no one would see unless they specifically looked. "Help me," the scratches spelled out. "Been here weeks. Can't leave. He won't let me go." And then in fresher scratches that looked more recent, "New guest in 7, warn them he's coming back." I scrambled backward away from the bed, and that's when I heard it. Scratching sounds coming from inside the wall behind the headboard. Slow, deliberate scratching, like fingernails on wood, forming a rhythm that almost sounded like Morse code. The scratching stopped abruptly, and I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, labored breathing coming from somewhere inside the walls, accompanied by a faint whimpering that sounded like someone trying not to cry. I grabbed my clothes and ran. Didn't pack, didn't check out, just threw on my jeans and shoes and got out of that room as fast as possible. But as I reached my car, I heard something that still gives me nightmares. Someone was pounding on the inside of the wall of room 7. Desperate, frantic pounding, like someone trapped inside the structure itself trying to break through to get out or get someone's attention. And mixed with the pounding, I could hear a voice, muffled but clearly human, screaming for help. I drove to the nearest police station and told them everything. They were skeptical but agreed to check it out, probably figuring it was better to investigate a crazy story than ignore a potential emergency. 2 hours later, they called me back. They'd searched room 7 thoroughly, they said. No evidence of anyone being held against their will, no signs of violence, no hidden spaces in the walls. The motel clerk confirmed that I'd been the only guest in that room for the past month, and there were no reports of missing persons in the area. But they did find something interesting. When they pulled up the floorboards under the bed, they discovered a small space that had been hollowed out, just big enough for someone to hide in. It was empty now, but there were signs that someone had been living there recently. Food wrappers, water bottles, human waste, and scratches covering every surface. Someone had been trapped under that bed, maybe for weeks, listening to guests sleep just inches above them, trying to warn people through messages carved in wood and written in blood. The police never found who it was or what happened to them, but they did find records showing that room 7 had an unusually high number of guest complaints over the past year. People reporting feeling watched, hearing sounds in the walls, waking up with unexplained anxiety and night sweats. I never found out who had been living under that bed or why they couldn't leave. But I know that someone desperate and terrified had been trying to warn future guests about something that was still in that room. Something that apparently came back periodically to check on whoever was sleeping in that bed. And I know that the cold sweat I'd been waking up in wasn't mine. It was the residual terror of everyone who'd slept in that room before me. People who'd absorbed the fear of whoever was trapped underneath. People who'd become part of the warning system for guests like me who were unlucky enough to need a $29 room for the night. I still wonder who's sleeping in room 7 now and whether they're waking up drenched in that same cold, frightened sweat. I wonder if they can hear the scratching in the walls and if they're smart enough to look under the bed before it's too late. Because I'm pretty sure that whoever was hiding there isn't gone. They're just waiting for the right person to take their place in that horrible little space. Someone desperate enough to accept any shelter, even if it means becoming part of the warning system for the next guest who thinks $29 is too good a deal to pass up. Story 6. The Courtesy Call. I was standing in that hotel room at 3:47 a.m. holding the phone receiver with trembling hands, listening to someone whisper my childhood nickname that only my dead grandmother ever used when I realized the voice on the other end knew things about me that I'd never told anyone. And they'd been waiting in that room for me to come back to a place I'd never been before. This happened at the Grand Harbor Hotel in Portland. And I need you to understand something important. I had never been to Portland before in my life, never been to Oregon, never had any reason to visit, never even driven through on vacation. But somehow, someone at that hotel had been expecting me. I was there for a pharmaceutical conference, a last-minute work assignment when my colleague got sick. The company booked me into the Grand Harbor because it was close to the convention center and fit the budget. Standard business trip, fly in, attend sessions, fly out. Nothing complicated. The room was on the 8th floor, corner suite, nicer than I usually got for work travel. The Grand Harbor was one of those classic downtown hotels that traded on old-world elegance. Brass fixtures, dark wood, the kind of place that made you feel sophisticated just walking through the lobby. The first night I got in around 11 after a delayed flight and went straight to bed. But at exactly 3:47 a.m. the phone rang. In a hotel room, a ringing phone in the middle of the night hits differently than it does at home. At home, it means emergency. Someone's hurt, someone's died, something terrible has happened. In a hotel, it usually means wrong number, drunk dial, or some kind of automated system glitch. Annoying, but not necessarily alarming. I answered without really thinking about it. Hello? Silence, not dead air. I could hear someone breathing on the other end. Slow, deliberate breathing, like someone was thinking carefully about what to say. Hello? I said again, more irritated now. Still just breathing. Wet, uncomfortable breathing that made my skin crawl. After about 30 seconds, I hung up. The second night, same thing. 3:47 a.m. exactly, phone ringing. This time I let it go to voicemail, but when I checked in the morning, there was no message. Just a missed call at 3:47. The third night, I was ready for it. I'd been lying there awake since 3:30, watching the digital clock on the nightstand count down to 3:47. Right on schedule, the phone rang. I answered immediately. "Who is this?" The breathing was there again, but this time, after a long pause, I heard a voice. Barely a whisper, so quiet I had to press the receiver tight against my ear to make out the words. "Danny," the voice said, "you came back." Danny was my childhood nickname. Only my family had called me that, and only when I was very young. I'd been David for 25 years since I started high school. But this voice, this whisper, it sounded almost relieved to be saying that name. "Who is this?" I demanded. "How do you know that name?" "You said you'd come back when you were older," the voice continued, completely ignoring my questions. "You promised you wouldn't forget." "I think you have the wrong number," I said, but my voice was shaking. There was something about this whisper that felt familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. "Room 847, the voice said. "You're in room 847. You always said you'd stay in room 847 when you came back." I looked around the room, confirming what I already knew. I was indeed in room 847. But I'd never requested this specific room, never been to this hotel before, never made any promises to anyone about coming back anywhere. "Look, I don't know who you think I am." The line went dead. I called the front desk immediately, hands shaking as I dialed 0. "This is room 847, I said when someone answered. "I keep getting calls in the middle of the night from someone who seems to know me, but I've never been here before. Can you check if someone has been asking for me specifically?" The night clerk sounded tired but professional. "Let me look into that for you, sir. Can I put you on hold for a moment?" When she came back, she sounded confused. "Mr. Peterson, I'm not showing any calls to your room in our phone logs. No internal or external calls since you checked in." "That's impossible. The phone has rung at exactly 3:47 a.m. for the past 3 nights. Sir, our system logs every call automatically. There's no record of any calls to room 847. But even as she said it, I could see the red message light blinking on the phone, indicating a voicemail had just been left. "Can you check again?" I asked. "There's a voicemail light on right now." Another pause. "Sir, there's no voicemail in our system for your room." I hung up and immediately dialed the voicemail retrieval number posted next to the phone. The automated system told me I had one new message, received at 3:52 a.m., just minutes earlier. The message was that same whispered voice, but this time it was clearer, more urgent. "Danny, I know you're confused. I know you don't remember. But you used to come here when you were little. You'd sneak out of your grandmother's house and walk here, and you'd sit in the lobby and pretend you were a guest. You told the staff you were going to stay in room 847 someday when you were grown up and had money. You made me promise to wait for you." My blood ran cold. I had spent summers with my grandmother when I was very young, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She lived in what I remembered as a small town, not a city like Portland. But the memory this voice was describing, sneaking out to sit in a fancy hotel lobby pretending to be a sophisticated guest, that was real. That had happened. The voicemail continued. "You don't remember because you were so young and because your grandmother moved away after that summer. But I remember. I've been working here for 30 years waiting for you to come back like you promised. I saved room 847 for you whenever I could." I sat down heavily on the bed, my mind racing. Could this be real? Could someone have actually remembered a child's silly promise for 3 decades? The 4th night, I unplugged the phone before going to bed. I wasn't going to deal with any more midnight calls from someone claiming to remember my childhood better than I did. But at 3:47 a.m., the phone rang anyway. I stared at it in disbelief. The phone was unplugged from the wall, completely disconnected from the hotel's phone system, but it was ringing with that same insistent, old-fashioned bell tone. I answered because at that point I needed to know what was happening. "Hello, Danny," the voice said, and this time it was clear enough that I could tell it was a woman, probably elderly. "I need to see you. I need to show you something." "What do you want from me?" I asked, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "I want to show you the scrapbook," she said. "I kept a scrapbook of all the times you visited. Pictures, the drawings you made, the stories you told me about what you were going to do when you grew up. You need to see it so you'll remember." "Where are you?" "I'm in the basement, room B12. Take the service elevator behind the ice machine on your floor. I'll be waiting." The line went dead, and this time when I tried to call the front desk, my phone had no dial tone. It was completely dead, even though it had just been receiving calls on its own. I know this is the part where you're thinking I should have stayed in my room, called security from my cell phone, maybe checked out immediately. And you're right. That would have been the smart thing to do. But I had to know. The childhood memories this woman was describing were real, even if I couldn't remember the specific details. And if someone had really been waiting 30 years for me to keep a promise I'd made as a child, I felt obligated to at least hear her out. The service elevator was exactly where she'd said it would be, hidden behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." It was old and industrial, clearly not meant for guests. When I pressed the button for the basement, it descended with a grinding mechanical sound that suggested it hadn't been used in years. The basement hallway was dimly lit and smelled like old concrete and machine oil. Room B12 was at the end, door slightly ajar, warm yellow light spilling out into the corridor. I knocked and heard that same whispered voice. "Come in, Danny." The room was small and cramped, filled with hotel maintenance equipment and storage boxes. But in the center, an elderly woman in a hotel uniform sat at a small table with a photo album spread out in front of her. She looked up at me with eyes that were definitely familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen them before. "You grew up exactly like you said you would," she said, smiling. "Tall and handsome and important enough to stay in the fancy rooms." She opened the scrapbook and my blood turned to ice water. The photos showed a young boy, definitely me, sitting in the Grand Harbor's lobby, talking to various hotel staff members, drawing pictures at the concierge desk. There were dozens of them taken over what looked like several months during one summer. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was that in every single photo I was alone, talking to empty air, drawing pictures for no one, smiling and laughing with people who weren't there. "You couldn't see the other staff," the woman explained gently. "Only me. Your grandmother thought you had an imaginary friend, but I was real. I just worked different shifts than the living employees." I backed toward the door, finally understanding what I was looking at, what I'd been talking to for 4 nights. "You died?" I said. It wasn't a question. 32 years ago, she confirmed, heart attack during my night shift. But I loved this hotel and I loved talking to you, so I stayed. I kept working my shift, waiting for you to come back like you promised. I ran, took the stairs instead of the elevator, didn't stop until I was back in room 847 with every light turned on and my suitcase packed. But as I was checking out the next morning, the desk clerk, a different woman from the night before, stopped me. "Mr. Peterson, I have something for you." She handed me a manila envelope with my name written on it in shaky handwriting. Inside were the photos from the scrapbook, along with a note. "Danny, thank you for keeping your promise, even if you didn't remember making it. I can rest now knowing you turned out to be everything you said you would be. The room will always be here if you want to visit, but I won't be calling anymore. Love, Margaret." I looked up at the desk clerk. "Who gave this to you?" She looked confused. "I found it at the front desk this morning with your name on it. I assumed another guest had left it for you. I still have those photos, and I've done some research since then." Margaret Holloway worked at the Grand Harbor Hotel for 15 years before dying of a heart attack in 1991. She was known for being especially kind to children who visited the hotel with their families. My grandmother did live in Portland for one summer when I was 6 while she was taking care of her sister who was ill. I don't remember much about that summer, but I do remember feeling lonely and wandering around the neighborhood while she was at the hospital. I never returned to the Grand Harbor Hotel, but sometimes I think about Margaret, working her eternal night shift, finally able to rest because a grown man honored a promise his 6-year-old self had made to an already dead woman who just wanted someone to talk to during the long, lonely hours when the living world was fast asleep. Story 7. The Connecting Door. I woke up to find all the furniture I'd piled against the connecting door moved back to its original positions, the deadbolt unlocked, and the door standing wide open to reveal absolute darkness beyond. And that's when I heard breathing coming from just inside that black void, slow and patient, like someone had been standing there for hours, waiting for me to finally notice they were there. The Chancellor Hotel in downtown Detroit booked me into room 1247, which I later learned was specifically requested by name when my company made the reservation. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Business travel means you get whatever room is available and you don't ask questions about the details. The room was standard corporate hotel fare, clean and functional, with one notable feature: a connecting door to the adjacent room. You know the kind. Those heavy doors with deadbolts on both sides that let families or business travelers book adjoining rooms when they need extra space. I didn't think anything of it initially. The door was closed and locked from my side, and I assumed the room next door was either empty or occupied by another guest who valued their privacy as much as I did. But on the first night around midnight, I heard someone trying the handle. Not aggressively, not like someone was trying to break in. Just gentle, persistent testing of the door handle, followed by what sounded like someone pressing against the door itself, maybe putting their ear to the wood to listen for sounds from my room. I got up and checked the deadbolt, making sure it was securely engaged. Through the door, I could hear movement, footsteps, the sound of someone shifting around what might have been furniture being moved. Normal hotel sounds except for the continued gentle testing of our connecting door handle. Every few minutes someone would try the handle again, slow, deliberate, like they were checking to see if I'd unlocked it from my side. The next morning I called the front desk. "This is room 1247, I said. "I'm hearing a lot of activity from the room next door and someone keeps trying the connecting door handle. Is that room occupied?" There was a pause while the desk clerk checked their system. "Sir, room 1249 has been vacant for several months. We're doing some renovations in there, so it's not available for booking right now." "Renovations that happen at midnight?" "No, sir. The work crew only comes during daytime hours. There shouldn't be anyone in that room after 6 p.m. But I knew what I'd heard. Someone was definitely in room 1249. And they were very interested in the connecting door between our rooms. That night, I decided to investigate. I put my ear to the connecting door and listened carefully. At first, silence, then faint sounds that made my skin crawl, breathing right on the other side of the door. Someone was standing exactly where I was standing, separated from me by just a few inches of wood. I backed away from the door and immediately heard the handle being tested again. But this time, it wasn't gentle. The handle turned back and forth aggressively, and I could hear someone pushing against the door, testing the strength of the deadbolt. "Hello?" I called out, loud enough to be heard through the door. The sound stopped immediately. Complete silence for about 10 minutes, then the gentle handle testing resumed. The third night, I decided to take precautions. I moved the heavy dresser in front of the connecting door, then piled my suitcases in the desk chair on top of that. If someone managed to unlock their side and my side of the door, they'd still have to move several hundred pounds of furniture to get through. I went to bed feeling secure, but woke up around 3 a.m. to sounds that made no sense. The furniture was being moved. Not dragged or pushed with force, but lifted and repositioned with careful precision. I could hear the dresser being lifted, not slid across the carpet, but actually lifted and set down in a different location. I turned on the lights and nearly screamed. All the furniture I'd piled against the connecting door was back in its original position. The dresser against the opposite wall, the chair at the desk, my suitcases neatly arranged by the window. Everything exactly where it had been when I first checked into the room, and the deadbolt on the connecting door was unlocked. I rushed over and engaged the deadbolt again, then started moving furniture back. But as I was dragging the dresser across the room, I heard something that stopped me cold. Laughter. Soft, amused laughter coming from the other side of the door, like someone was genuinely entertained by my efforts. I pressed my ear to the door again, and this time I heard a voice. Faint, but clear enough to understand. "You can't keep me out forever," the voice said. It sounded like a man, middle-aged, with an accent I couldn't place. "I've been waiting in here for a very long time, and I'm getting impatient." "What do you want?" I called through the door. "I want you to open the door," he replied immediately, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. "I want you to let me into your room so we can talk face to face. I have so much to tell you." "Who are you?" "I'm the guest in room 1249. I've been staying here much longer than you have, and I know things about this hotel that you need to understand. But I can't tell you through the door. You need to let me in." I backed away from the door, my heart racing. "I'm calling security." "They won't come," the voice said. And now it sounded closer, like he was pressed right against the door. "They never come when guests call about room 1249. They know better than to get involved." I tried calling the front desk, but the phone in my room was dead. I tried my cell phone, but I had no signal, which was strange because I'd had full bars earlier. That's when I heard the deadbolt on the other side being unlocked. The only thing keeping that door closed now was the deadbolt on my side, and as I watched in horror, it began to turn slowly, like invisible fingers were working it from inside my room. I grabbed the deadbolt and tried to hold it in place, but it turned anyway, my hands moving with it like I was a puppet being controlled by someone else. I wasn't turning it. It was turning despite my best efforts to stop it. The door swung open, revealing room 1249 beyond. The room was identical to mine in layout, but everything else was wrong. The wallpaper was different, older, more ornate, like something from decades past. The furniture was antique, heavy wooden pieces that belonged in a different era. And the smell that wafted out was overwhelming. Old cigarettes, stale alcohol, and something organic and unpleasant that I didn't want to identify. But the most disturbing thing was the darkness. Despite having the same windows as my room, room 1249 was pitch black beyond the first few feet. The light from my room illuminated the immediate area past the doorway, but beyond that was absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And in that darkness, I could see someone moving. Not clearly, just the suggestion of a figure shifting around in the black void, getting closer to the doorway but never quite stepping into the light. I could hear breathing, footsteps on carpet, the sound of someone brushing against furniture as they moved through the dark room. "Come in," the voice called from somewhere in that darkness. "I want to show you something." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to slam the door, to barricade it, to get out of the hotel entirely. But I found myself taking a step toward the doorway, then another, like something was pulling me forward against my will. "That's right," the voice encouraged. "Just a few more steps. I've been so lonely in here, waiting for someone to visit." I was almost at the threshold when I heard something that broke whatever spell was drawing me forward. My cell phone buzzing with a text message. The sound was so normal, so connected to the real world that it snapped me back to reality. I lunged backward, grabbed the connecting door, and slammed it shut. The deadbolt turned easily this time, locking with a solid click that felt reassuringly final. But from the other side, I heard pounding. Violent, furious pounding, like someone was attacking the door with their fists, trying to break through by sheer force. "You can't keep me out!" the voice screamed, no longer friendly or patient. "I've been waiting too long. You have to let me in. You have to." The pounding continued for hours, sometimes accompanied by scratching sounds like fingernails clawing at wood. Around dawn, it finally stopped. I packed my bags and checked out immediately, making up an excuse about a family emergency. But as I was loading my car in the hotel parking lot, I looked up at the windows of rooms 1247 and 1249. In the window of room 1249, someone was standing there watching me. I couldn't make out details from that distance, but I could see a dark figure pressed against the glass. And even from the parking lot, I could feel their attention focused on me with laser intensity. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw something that still gives me nightmares. The figure in the window was waving goodbye, but it wasn't the casual wave of a fellow hotel guest. It was the slow, deliberate wave of someone who knew they'd see me again soon. 3 weeks later, I got a call at work from someone claiming to be the manager of the Chancellor Hotel. "Mr. Peterson," the voice said, "we wanted to follow up on your recent stay with us. We noticed you checked out early, and we want to make sure everything was satisfactory with your accommodations." "It was fine," I lied. "Just had to leave for personal reasons." "We understand completely. We'd like to offer you a complimentary return stay to make up for any inconvenience. We have room 1247 available whenever you'd like to come back." I hung up without responding, but the calls kept coming. Always from a different number, always the same offer: a free stay in room 1247 available whenever I was ready to return. I finally changed my phone number and requested that my company never book me into the Chancellor Hotel again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that patient voice from room 1249 reminding me that he's still waiting, still wanting to show me something in that dark space beyond the connecting door. And I know that someday I'm going to be weak enough or tired enough or desperate enough to take them up on their offer of a free return stay, because some invitations don't expire. They just wait until you're ready to accept them. Story 8. Checkout time. I've been trapped in this hotel for 3 days now, and I'm starting to understand that the pounding I heard on checkout morning wasn't housekeeping trying to get me to leave. It was the other guests, the ones who never made it out, trying to warn me that once you oversleep in room 312 at the Meridian Inn, checkout time becomes a very different kind of deadline. Let me start from the beginning, because I need to get this down while I still remember what the outside world feels like, before this place makes me forget there was ever anything beyond these walls. I was in Minneapolis for a client presentation, staying at the Meridian Inn because it was close to the office building and moderately priced. Nothing fancy, but clean and professional. The kind of place business travelers use when they need efficiency over luxury. My presentation was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Thursday, which meant I needed to be out of the hotel by 8:30 at the latest. I set 3 different alarms on my phone, requested a wake-up call from the front desk, and even asked my colleague to call me at 7 a.m. just to make sure I didn't oversleep. I'd learned from experience that important meetings require backup plans for backup plans, but somehow, I slept through everything. I woke up to frantic pounding on my door and voices in the hallway. Housekeeping, management, someone yelling that I needed to leave immediately, that I was way past checkout time and they needed the room. I bolted upright, disoriented and panicked. My phone showed 11:47 a.m., which meant I'd not only missed my presentation but slept through 3 alarms and a wake-up call. The pounding on the door was getting more aggressive, more desperate, like whoever was out there was genuinely frightened about something. "I'm sorry," I called out as I threw on clothes. "I'm leaving right now, just give me 2 minutes." The pounding stopped immediately. Complete silence from the hallway, which seemed strange given how urgent they'd sounded just moments before. I packed in record time, grabbed my keycard, and opened the door to apologize in person for the inconvenience. The hallway was empty. Not just quiet, completely deserted. No housekeeping cart, no staff members, no other guests. Just a long carpeted corridor with harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look pale and institutional. I walked to the elevator expecting to run into whoever had been pounding on my door, but the elevator arrived empty. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my floor in the hallway mirror, and for just a second I could swear I saw people standing outside my room. Several figures in hotel uniforms, all facing my door, all perfectly still like they were waiting for something. But when I looked directly through the elevator's closing doors, the hallway was empty again. The elevator descended to the lobby, and when the doors opened, I stepped into a space that felt fundamentally wrong. The lobby looked exactly as it should. Same furniture, same decor, same layout. But it was completely silent and empty. No guests checking in or out, no staff behind the front desk, no sounds from the restaurant or gift shop. It was like stepping into a photograph of a hotel lobby rather than an actual functioning space. I approached the front desk, thinking maybe everyone was in the back office dealing with some kind of emergency. But there was no one there. The computers were on, phones were plugged in, everything looked normal except for the complete absence of human life. "Hello?" I called out. "I need to check out of room 312. My voice echoed strangely in the empty space, like the acoustics were wrong somehow. And from somewhere deeper in the hotel, maybe the restaurant or conference rooms, I heard what sounded like a response, voices calling back, but too distant and muffled to understand. I followed the sounds, thinking I'd find the staff gathered somewhere dealing with whatever crisis had emptied the lobby. But as I walked deeper into the hotel, the voices seemed to move away from me, always staying just out of reach, just around the next corner. I spent 20 minutes wandering through empty conference rooms, a deserted restaurant, a gift shop with no cashier, trying to find anyone who could process my checkout. But the hotel felt abandoned, like everyone had suddenly evacuated without taking any of their belongings. Finally, I gave up and headed for the exit. If I couldn't find anyone to formally check out, I'd just leave and deal with any charges later. But when I reached the main entrance, something impossible happened. The doors wouldn't open. They were the standard automatic glass doors that should have opened when I approached, but they remained sealed shut. I waved my hands in front of the sensors, pressed my body against the glass, even tried to find a manual override, but nothing worked. The doors were locked tight, and there was no visible way to open them from the inside. I tried every exit I could find, fire exits, service doors, even windows, but nothing would open. It was like the entire hotel had been sealed from the outside, trapping me inside with no way to leave. That's when I started to panic. I ran back to the front desk and tried calling 911 from one of the house phones, but there was no dial tone. I tried my cell phone, but I had no signal, which was impossible because I'd had full bars when I woke up. I was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in an empty hotel with no way to communicate and no way to leave. I decided to go back to my room and try to figure out what was happening. Maybe this was some kind of security lockdown. Maybe there was a gas leak or bomb threat that required evacuation protocols I didn't understand. There had to be a logical explanation. But when I got to the elevator, it wouldn't respond to my calls. The buttons lit up when I pressed them, but the elevator never came. After 10 minutes of waiting, I took the stairs. That's when I realized how truly trapped I was. Every stairwell led back to the same floor. It didn't matter which direction I went, which exit I took, or how many flights I climbed or descended. Every door I opened led back to the 3rd floor, and every hallway led back to room 312. I tried this for hours, mapping out different routes, marking doors with my key card so I could track where I'd been. But the result was always the same. No matter what I did, I always ended up back on the 3rd floor, back in the same hallway, facing the same door to room 312. The hotel had become a maze with only one destination, and I was trapped inside it. By evening, I was exhausted and terrified. I went back to room 312, the only place I seemed able to reach, and tried to think rationally about what was happening. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress of work had finally caught up with me and I was experiencing a psychotic episode. But everything felt real. The carpet under my feet, the weight of my key card in my hand, the hunger in my stomach as I realized I hadn't eaten anything all day. If this was a hallucination, it was the most convincing one in medical history. That night I heard them for the first time. Voices in the other rooms, muffled but distinct, having conversations that seemed to go on for hours. I pressed my ear to the wall and could make out words. Complaints about being late for meetings, concerns about missing flights, desperate attempts to contact the outside world. Other guests, other people who were trapped just like me. I pounded on the walls, trying to get their attention, trying to communicate, but the voices never responded to my efforts. They continued their conversations as if they couldn't hear me, as if they were having the same desperate discussions they'd been having since they first got trapped. The second day was worse. I woke up hoping the whole experience had been some kind of elaborate nightmare, but I was still in room 312, still unable to leave the 3rd floor, still completely cut off from the outside world. But now I was starting to hear more details from the other rooms. The voices belonged to business travelers like me, people who'd overslept, people who'd missed checkout time, people who'd found themselves trapped in a hotel that wouldn't let them leave. And they'd been here for different lengths of time. Some sounded like they'd just arrived, panicked and confused about their situation. Others sounded resigned, like they'd been having the same conversations for weeks or months. A few sounded completely detached from reality, talking to themselves about meetings and flights that had happened years ago. The 3rd day, today, I finally understood what this place really is. The Meridian Inn isn't just a hotel, it's a collection point, a trap for people who break the rules of hospitality in some fundamental way. Checkout time isn't just a business policy, it's a cosmic deadline, and if you miss it, you become part of the hotel's permanent collection. I found evidence in the housekeeping closet on my floor. Boxes of personal belongings labeled with dates going back decades, suitcases covered in dust, briefcases that belonged to business travelers who thought they were just staying for one night. And I found the registration book hidden behind cleaning supplies filled with names and room numbers of guests who never officially checked out. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all people who overslept or ignored checkout time and found themselves trapped in their own personal version of the Meridian Inn. The hotel creates a separate reality for each trapped guest, a pocket dimension where they're the only person in an otherwise empty building, forced to relive the same desperate attempts to leave over and over again until they accept that this is their home now. I can hear them in their rooms, my fellow inmates, each trapped in their own isolated version of the same hotel, each convinced they're the only person experiencing this nightmare. We're all here together, but we're all completely alone. I don't know how long I've actually been here. My phone still shows the same day I overslept, but that can't be right. It feels like weeks have passed, but the clock in my room never changes. Always showing 11:47 a.m., the exact moment I woke up past checkout time. Time doesn't work normally in this place. The hotel exists outside of regular schedules in a space where checkout time is permanent and guests become part of the furniture. I'm writing this on hotel stationery because I need to document what happened, need to leave some record for the next person who finds themselves in room 312 after oversleeping. But I know that by the time someone reads this, I'll probably be just another voice in the walls, having the same desperate conversations about missing meetings and needing to get home. The hotel is patient. It doesn't need to break us or drive us crazy. It just needs to wait until we accept that we live here now, until we stop trying to leave and start going through the motions of being permanent guests. I can feel it happening already. Part of me is starting to think that maybe this isn't so bad, maybe I can make a life here, maybe I don't really need to go back to the outside world anyway. But I'm fighting that feeling because I know it's the first step toward becoming like the voices in the other rooms. People who've been here so long they've forgotten there was ever anywhere else to be. If you're reading this, if you've somehow found your way into room 312, then you've already made the same mistake I did. You overslept on checkout day and now the hotel has claimed you as permanent inventory. I don't know if there's a way out. I haven't found one yet. But I know that if you listen carefully at night, you can hear all of us. Dozens of trapped guests, each in our own version of the same building, each trying to find a way back to a world where checkout time is just a suggestion rather than a life sentence. Welcome to the Meridian Inn. I hope your stay is more temporary than mine. But I'm starting to doubt that anyone ever really checks out of this place once they've broken the fundamental rule of hospitality. When they tell you it's time to leave, you'd better be gone before the clock runs out because some deadlines are more final than others.